Now let's begin. Curtis English sat in his study, the evening light casting long shadows across the mahogany desk that had once belonged to his father. The room smelled of leather and old books, a sanctuary he'd built over decades. At 62, Curtis maintained the sharp posture of his military days, though his hair had gone silver at the temples. He was reviewing acquisition documents when his phone rang. "Dad," Doris's voice cracked on the other end, and Curtis felt his entire body tense. In 34 years, he'd heard his daughter cry exactly 3 times. When her mother died, when her childhood dog passed, and when she graduated summa cum laude because Diana wasn't there to see it. What happened? Curtis set down his pen with deliberate precision, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. "It's over. I can't. Dad, I can't do this anymore." Her breath hitched. "Barb slapped me. In front of everyone at their charity gala. She said I was nothing without Brad, that I should be grateful they even let me into their family." Curtis's jaw tightened. He'd spent 20 years in Army intelligence before transitioning to corporate strategy consulting, and he'd learned to keep his emotions separate from his actions. But hearing the pain in his daughter's voice made that separation difficult. "Where are you now?" "Still at the hotel." He stood there, Dad. He didn't say anything. He just looked away like he was embarrassed of me, not her. "Pack your things. I'm sending a car. You're coming home." Curtis's voice was calm, measured, but anyone who knew him would recognize the steel underneath. "Brad won't. Brad doesn't get a vote. Not anymore. There's a black sedan pulling up to the hotel entrance in 15 minutes. The driver's name is Marcus. Get in the car, Doris. Come home." Curtis heard her exhale, a shaky sound of relief. Okay, I'm coming." After hanging up, Curtis sat motionless for 30 seconds, processing. Then he opened his bottom desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound folder. Inside were documents he'd been compiling for the past 3 years, ever since Doris had announced her engagement to Brad Dawson. Curtis hadn't liked Brad from their first meeting. The man had the polished veneer of old money but the substance of fool's gold. Everything about him screamed entitled, from his casual, name-dropping to the way he expected others to accommodate his schedule. But Curtis had raised Doris to make her own decisions, so he'd kept his concerns private and done what he did best. He'd investigated. What he'd found had been concerning, but not yet actionable. The Dawson family, Barb, Jeffrey, Brad, and Brad's younger sister Candace, ran a commercial real estate empire built on Jeffrey's father's fortune. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. But Curtis had contacts from his intelligence days, people who knew how to look beneath surfaces. The Dawsons were leveraged to the hilt. Their lifestyle, the mansion in Greenwich, the penthouse in Manhattan, the charity galas, was funded by increasingly risky loans and creative accounting. They needed capital, and Doris had brought plenty of it. Diana English had been a brilliant woman, a software engineer who developed security protocols that became industry standard. When she died of ovarian cancer 12 years ago, she'd left everything to Curtis with instructions to establish a trust for Doris. That trust, now worth north of $15 million, had become accessible to Doris at age 30. 2 months later, Brad Dawson had proposed. Curtis had wanted to warn her, but he'd learned from Diana that their daughter needed to make her own mistakes. So he'd watched, documented, and waited. Now, it seemed, the waiting was over. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to Marcus, his driver, with instructions to collect Doris. The second was to his lawyer and oldest friend, Kyle Horton. "Curtis, it's late for a social call, so I'm guessing this is business. The Dawson situation has escalated. Doris is coming home. We need to activate the contingency plans." Kyle was silent for a moment. They'd been friends since West Point, had served together, and later Kyle had gone to law school, while Curtis had joined the private sector. "Are you sure? Once we start this, there's no pulling back." "I'm sure. Clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. my house. I'll be there." The third call was to a number he hadn't dialed in 5 years. A woman answered on the second ring. "Curtis English. I didn't expect to hear from you again. Hello, Elena. I need your particular skills. Doris is in trouble." Elena Poole had been Doris's roommate at Yale and remained her closest friend. She was also an investigative journalist who'd made her name exposing corporate fraud and political corruption. If anyone could dig up dirt that would hold up in the court of public opinion, it was Elena. "Tell me everything," Elena said, and Curtis heard the click of a pen and rustle of paper. Doris arrived home at 11 p.m., her eyes red but her jaw set with determination that reminded Curtis painfully of Diana. She was wearing an elegant black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but her feet were bare. She'd apparently left her heels behind. Curtis met her at the door and pulled her into an embrace. For a moment, she was his little girl again, seeking comfort from her father. Then she stepped back and squared her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Dad. You were right about him. Don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for." He guided her into the kitchen, where he'd prepared chamomile tea, Diana's remedy for bad days. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." They sat at the kitchen island, and Doris recounted the evening. The gala had been for the Dawson Foundation, a charity ostensibly dedicated to providing housing for low-income families. In reality, Curtis knew it was a tax shelter that the Dawsons used to funnel money and boost their social standing. Barb had been drinking. She always drinks at these events, but tonight was worse. Doris wrapped her hands around the teacup. She cornered me in the powder room and started criticizing everything. My dress, my hair, how I'd talked to the Vanderbilt heir. Then she said I was embarrassing the family, that I was lucky Brad had married me because I was quirky and difficult. Curtis felt his blood pressure rise, but kept his expression neutral. I tried to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Hard. "I'll probably have bruises." Doris pushed up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped marks. Curtis made a mental note to photograph them. She said I needed to remember my place. That's when I told her my place was wherever I chose it to be, and right now, I chose not to be around her. "And that's when she hit you?" Doris nodded. We'd walked back into the main ballroom. At least 50 people saw it. She slapped me across the face and said, "You are nothing without my son." "Nothing." Her voice cracked slightly. "Brad was right there, Dad. He saw everything. And he just turned and walked away. Like I was the one causing a scene." "What did you do?" "I left. Just walked straight out." Brad's sister Candace followed me and said I was overreacting, that Barb was under a lot of stress, and I should apologize for provoking her. Doris laughed bitterly. "That's when I called you." Curtis reached across and took his daughter's hand. "You did the right thing. Now, I need you to listen carefully. The next few weeks are going to be difficult, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "What are you planning?" "To make sure you're protected. To make sure this never happens again. And to make sure the Dawsons understand there are consequences for their actions." He paused. "Brad will come after you. He'll try to manipulate you, guilt you, maybe even threaten you. His family will paint you as the villain. They'll use everything they can to maintain control." "I know. I've seen how they operate." Doris met his eyes. "I'm not going back, Dad. I'm done." "Good. Because starting tomorrow, we're going to dismantle everything they've built. But I need you to be strong. No contact with Brad, no matter what he says or promises. No social media posts. No talking to mutual friends. Radio silence." "What are you going to do?" Curtis smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I'm going to play chess, sweetheart. And the Dawsons don't even know they're on the board." The next morning, Kyle Horton arrived at 8:55 a.m., punctual as always. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a razor-sharp legal mind. He'd built his practice on representing underdogs against powerful interests, and he'd never lost the moral compass that had made him join JAG all those years ago. Curtis led him to the study, where he'd laid out everything: financial records, private investigator reports, photographs, timelines, and connection maps that looked like something from an intelligence operation, which, in a way, it was. Kyle whistled low. "You've been busy. I've been prepared. Diana always said hope for the best, plan for the worst." Curtis poured coffee from a silver service. "I knew the Dawsons were trouble. I just needed to know exactly what kind." They spent 2 hours reviewing the materials. The picture that emerged was damning. The Dawsons had built their empire on Jeffrey's inheritance, but Barb's extravagance and Brad's incompetence had bled it dry. They'd taken out loans using properties as collateral, then used those funds to maintain appearances rather than invest wisely. Several of their charitable housing projects were actually fronts for money laundering and tax evasion. "This is explosive," Kyle said, scanning a particularly incriminating set of bank transfers. "The IRS would have a field day. The state attorney's office would probably offer you a medal." But Curtis knew there was always a but. But going public means Doris gets dragged through it. The media would have a feeding frenzy, society, daughter divorces into scandal, all of that. It would be brutal. Which is why we're going to be strategic. Curtis pulled out a fresh legal pad. First priority, protect Doris. That means an airtight prenup enforcement, asset protection, and a restraining order if necessary. Second priority, ensure the Dawsons can't retaliate. Third priority, make sure they pay for what they've done. In that order? Kyle asked. In exactly that order. Doris's well-being comes first. Always. They were mapping out the legal strategy when Doris appeared in the doorway with Elena Poole. The journalist looked like she'd stepped out of a noir film. Sharp blazer, sharper eyes, and a messenger bag that probably held enough recording equipment to wire a stadium. Curtis. Elena shook his hand firmly. I've been doing some preliminary research. The Dawson Foundation is even worse than you think. She spread out her own files on the desk. Over the next hour, Elena detailed a pattern of fraud that went back over a decade. The foundation collected millions in donations, ostensibly for affordable housing projects. In reality, most of that money went to administrative costs, which meant Barb's shopping habits and Brad's lifestyle. The few properties they did develop were so poorly constructed that they were uninhabitable within years. There are families who lost their deposits, contractors who never got paid, and at least one case of a building that was condemned due to code violations that were ignored because Jeffrey Dawson had the inspectors in his pocket, Elena said. I've got 3 sources willing to go on record, and I can get more. Curtis leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Here's what we're going to do. Kyle, file for divorce on Doris's behalf today. Cite irreconcilable differences and Brad's failure to protect her from abuse. Include the photographs of her bruises. Request enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, and ask for a restraining order preventing the Dawsons from contacting Doris directly. Done. I can have the papers ready by end of business. Elena, I need you to hold your story. For now. The journalist frowned. Curtis, this is Pulitzer-level material. If I sit on it, you'll get your story. But timing matters. If you publish now, the Dawsons will circle the wagons, hire crisis management, and the story dies in a news cycle. We need to wait until they're vulnerable, until they can't fight back effectively. How long? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Can you wait that long? Elena looked at Doris, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Okay, I trust you. But I'm going to keep digging, and if someone else breaks it first, they won't. You're the only one with the full picture. Curtis turned to his daughter. Doris, I need you to write down everything. Every conversation with Barb, every time Brad prioritized his mother over you, every financial irregularity you noticed. Dates, times, witnesses if possible. Why? I'm divorcing him, not prosecuting him. Because knowledge is ammunition, and we're going to need all the ammunition we can get. Brad Dawson showed up 3 days later. Curtis watched through the study window as the silver Porsche pulled into the driveway, a car bought with Doris's trust fund money, according to the financial records. Brad was 35, conventionally handsome in the way that money could manufacture. Perfect teeth, tailored suit, expensive haircut. But Curtis had interrogated enough people to read body language, and Brad's confidence was performative. He was nervous. Curtis opened the door before Brad could ring the bell. Mr. Dawson. Mr. English. I need to speak with Doris. Brad tried to peer past Curtis into the house. That's not possible. My daughter doesn't want to see you. Look, I know things got out of hand at the gala, but my mother didn't mean. Your mother assaulted my daughter in front of 50 witnesses. I have photographs of the bruises. What exactly didn't she mean? Brad flushed. It was a misunderstanding. If Doris would just come home, we can work this out. Doris is home. This is her home. She's made her decision. You turned her against me. Brad's composure cracked. Everything was fine until she came running to Daddy. You've always thought you were better than us, haven't you? Military man, self-made fortune, looking down on old money. Curtis smiled thinly. I don't think about your family at all, Mr. Dawson. But since we're being honest, yes, I thought my daughter deserved better than a man who would let his mother abuse her and do nothing. I want to see my wife. Your soon-to-be ex-wife. You'll be receiving divorce papers shortly. I suggest you have your attorney review them carefully, particularly the sections regarding the prenuptial agreement and asset division. Brad's face went white. You can't. The prenup was just a formality. We're married. What's hers is mine. Actually, according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, and I have a copy right here, What's hers remains hers unless the marriage lasts 5 years and produces children. You've been married for 3 years and 8 months. Doris will retain her trust fund, her inheritance from her mother, and any assets purchased with those funds. That's not fair. I gave up opportunities to marry her. Such as, Curtis raised an eyebrow. Your job at your father's company, where you were overpaid and underperformed. The opportunities to marry other trust fund women? Please, enlighten me. Brad stepped forward aggressively, but Curtis didn't move. He'd faced down enemy combatants and corporate raiders. An entitled man-child didn't even register on the threat scale. You'll regret this, Brad hissed. My family has connections. We'll bury you in legal fees. We'll make sure Doris never works in this city again. You'll what, Mr. Dawson? Make more empty threats? I've been preparing for this conversation longer than you've known your wife. Every move you make, I've already anticipated. Every threat you level, I've already countered. You're playing checkers, and you don't even realize I'm playing chess. Curtis stepped aside from the doorway. Now, you can leave voluntarily, or I can call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Your choice. Brad's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Finally, he turned and stormed back to his car. Curtis watched him peel out of the driveway, then pulled out his phone and sent a text to Kyle. The rabbit is running scared. Expect contact from their attorney within 24 hours. The response came immediately. Good. Let them make the first mistake. Curtis found Doris in the sunroom, sketching in a notebook. She'd always drawn when she was anxious, a habit from childhood that had developed into genuine artistic talent. She looked up as he entered. Was that Brad? Yes. He wanted you to come home. I told him this is your home. Doris set down her pencil. What happens now? Curtis sat across from her. Now, we wait for them to panic. Brad will tell his mother what happened. Barb will call their lawyer. They'll try to figure out how to fight the prenup, how to access your trust fund, how to save face. And while they're scrambling, we'll be 10 steps ahead. Why didn't you just expose them immediately? Elena has enough to destroy them. Because destruction without purpose is just revenge, and revenge is a failure of imagination. Curtis leaned forward. I don't just want to punish the Dawsons. I want to dismantle their ability to hurt anyone else. That takes precision, timing, and patience. You sound like you're planning a military operation. Because I am, in a way. Every operation has objectives. Protect our assets, neutralize the threat, and achieve victory. But the best operations are the ones where your enemy defeats themselves. Doris smiled slightly. Mom used to say you were scary when you played chess. She said you'd see 20 moves ahead and make your opponents think they were winning right up until checkmate. Your mother was a wise woman. Curtis felt the familiar ache of her absence. She'd be proud of you, you know, for standing up for yourself. For leaving. I should have done it sooner. I saw the signs, the way Barb controlled everything, how Brad never had an opinion that differed from hers, how they made me feel like I was always falling short. But I kept thinking it would get better, that once we had kids, or once Brad established himself more. That's not naivete, Doris. That's hope. And there's nothing wrong with hoping for the best in people. Curtis stood and squeezed her shoulder. But when people show you who they are, believe them. And the Dawsons have shown us exactly who they are. Antonio Vance arrived at Curtis's door 2 days later. He was the Dawson family's attorney, a shark in an expensive suit with a reputation for aggressive litigation and creative interpretations of the law. Curtis had researched him thoroughly. Yale Law, white shoe firm background, won several high-profile cases through intimidation and drawn-out legal warfare. Mr. English, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Curtis led him to the study, noting how Vance's eyes cataloged everything. The military commendations on the wall, the chess set on the side table, the photographs of Curtis with various high-ranking officials and business leaders. I assume you're here about the divorce, Curtis said, not offering coffee or pleasantries. Yes, my clients are quite distressed by this turn of events. They feel that if we could all sit down like reasonable people, we could resolve this misunderstanding without legal action. There's no misunderstanding. Your client's mother physically assaulted my daughter. Your client failed to protect his wife. The marriage is over. Vance pulled out a leather portfolio. The Dawsons are prepared to be very generous in the divorce settlement. They're willing to offer Mrs. Dawson, Ms. English. She'll be resuming her maiden name. Ms. English a substantial financial package in exchange for an amicable separation. We're talking 7 figures, Mr. English. Curtis almost laughed. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You want my daughter to accept payment to quietly go away after being abused by her mother-in-law, so the Dawson family can avoid embarrassment? I wouldn't phrase it quite that way. How would you phrase it, Mr. Vance? Because from where I'm sitting, you're attempting to buy my daughter's silence about a physical assault. Vance shifted uncomfortably. The Dawsons maintained that the incident was overblown. Mrs. Barb Dawson was under considerable stress, and perhaps her discipline was overzealous. But she never intended. Discipline. Curtis's voice went cold. Doris is a 34-year-old woman, not a child. And even if she were a child, what Barb Dawson did would constitute abuse. Mr. English, let's be realistic. A public divorce, especially a contentious one, would be damaging to everyone involved. Your daughter's reputation, her social standing. My daughter's reputation is that of a brilliant woman who escaped an abusive marriage. That's not something to be ashamed of. Vance tried a different tactic. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear that any assets acquired during the marriage are subject to division. The Dawsons have significant claims to. Curtis slid a thick folder across the desk. This is our forensic accounting of the marriage. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every asset purchase. As you'll see, any assets acquired during the marriage were purchased exclusively with funds from Doris's trust, which the prenup explicitly protects. The Dawsons contributed nothing. In fact, Curtis flipped to a highlighted section. Brad Dawson withdrew over $2 million from their joint account for business investments that appear to have gone directly to his mother's personal accounts. Vance paled slightly as he scanned the documents. This is privileged financial information. How did you? Everything here was obtained legally. Doris had full access to their joint accounts and records. She simply exercised that access. Curtis leaned back. Now, let me make the Dawsons a counteroffer. Brad signs the divorce papers, agrees to the terms of the prenup as written, and the family agrees to have no contact with Doris. In exchange, we'll keep this quiet and simple. And if my clients reject this offer, then we proceed with litigation. And I can assure you, Mr. Vance, we are prepared for a very long, very public, very expensive fight. Kyle Horton is representing Doris, and as you know, he doesn't bill by the hour. He takes cases on principle. We have unlimited resources and unlimited patience. Do the Dawsons? Vance closed the portfolio. I'll convey your position to my clients. You do that. And Mr. Vance? Tell them they have 1 week to respond. After that, things get considerably less friendly. After Vance left, Curtis called Kyle. He took the bait. They're going to fight. You knew they would, Kyle said. Barb Dawson's pride won't let her back down, and Jeffrey won't stand up to her. Which means they'll make mistakes. Angry people always do. The next week was a flurry of activity. Brad tried 3 more times to contact Doris, twice by phone, once by showing up at Curtis's office building. Each time, Curtis had security escort him away and documented the attempted contact for the restraining order. Barb Dawson went on the offensive publicly, posting on social media about ungrateful daughters-in-law and difficult women who can't accept guidance. She stopped short of naming Doris directly, but everyone in their social circle knew exactly who she meant. Curtis watched it all with satisfaction. Every post, every attempted contact, every snippy comment to mutual friends was ammunition. Barb was doing exactly what Curtis had predicted. She was too arrogant to see the trap closing around her. Elena worked her sources, building the investigative piece that would eventually expose the foundation's fraud. She'd found former employees willing to testify about accounting irregularities, families who'd lost money on Dawson Foundation housing projects, and even a building inspector who'd been pressured to sign off on unsafe construction. This is going to be massive, Elena told Curtis and Doris during a strategy meeting. Multiple felonies, civil liability, probable criminal prosecution. The Dawsons won't just lose their reputation, they'll lose everything. We need more, Curtis said. I want them completely neutralized. What about the loans? Elena flipped through her notes. Jeffrey Dawson has personally guaranteed multiple loans totaling around $30 million. The properties are over-leveraged, and several are underwater given current market conditions. If the banks called those loans, they'd be ruined, Kyle finished. But why would the banks call the loans if the Dawsons are making payments? Curtis smiled. Because we're going to give them a reason to. He explained his plan. It was risky, required precise timing, and involved some ethically gray areas. But it was also brilliant. The Dawsons' primary lender was Metropolitan Trust Bank. Curtis had contacts there from his consulting days. He'd helped the bank navigate a hostile takeover attempt 5 years ago. He made a call to the head of the commercial lending division. Curtis English. It's been a while. Robert Chun. Good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I'm calling about a client of yours. The Dawson family. Specifically, their commercial real estate portfolio. That's confidential information, Curtis. You know I can't discuss. I'm not asking you to discuss anything. I'm telling you that you might want to take a closer look at their portfolio. Specifically, their loan-to-value ratios and the actual condition of their properties. There was a long pause. Are you saying there's a problem? I'm saying that if I were a lender with significant exposure to the Dawson portfolio, I'd want to conduct a fresh appraisal. That's all. What you do with that information is up to you. I appreciate the heads up. Hypothetically, if we did find issues with the portfolio, what would your interest be in this situation? Personal. Family matter. But I thought you deserved to know that the emperor might not have any clothes. Curtis knew that would be enough. Robert was cautious and thorough. He'd order the appraisals, discover the over-leveraged properties and deferred maintenance, and the bank would take action to protect its interests. All Curtis had to do was plant the seed. On day 14, everything accelerated. Brad showed up at Curtis's door with divorce papers of his own and Antonio Vance in tow. Curtis invited them into the study with a smile. Gentlemen, to what do I owe the pleasure? Brad slammed the papers onto Curtis's desk. We're done playing games. My family has had enough of your daughter's dramatics. She wants a divorce? Fine. Here are our terms. Curtis didn't touch the papers. Your terms. Joint custody of any future children, 50% of all marital assets including her trust fund, and an agreement that she won't disparage the Dawson family publicly. We're also requiring her to return all gifts given during the marriage, including her engagement ring, which is a family heirloom. Is that all? Curtis asked mildly. Sign it, or we'll bury you both in litigation. My mother has already spoken to 3 different media outlets about Doris's erratic behavior. We have friends in family court who will. Curtis held up a hand. Mr. Vance, I assume you've advised your client about the legal weaknesses in this position? Vance shifted uncomfortably. My client is aware of all relevant factors. Then you know that custody of non-existent children isn't a matter for divorce proceedings, that the prenup explicitly protects Doris's trust fund, and that your client has no legal standing to demand the return of gifts given in contemplation of marriage. The prenup can be challenged, Brad said. I signed it under duress. Your daughter pressured me. Did you have an attorney review it before signing? Yes, but was that attorney present during the signing? Yes. Did you have the opportunity to negotiate terms or request changes? Brad's face reddened. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. You had legal counsel, you had time to review, you signed willingly. The prenup stands. Curtis opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Now, let me show you what Doris is prepared to offer. He slid the envelope across the desk. Brad opened it, and Curtis watched the color drain from his face. Vance leaned over to read, and his expression went from confident to shocked to professionally blank in rapid succession. What is this? Brad whispered. That, Curtis said calmly, is a complete accounting of every fraudulent transaction made by the Dawson Foundation over the past 10 years. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, fake contractor invoices, donations that were diverted to personal expenses. There's also documentation of building code violations, bribery of city officials, and tax fraud. Page 15 shows where you personally withdrew $2.3 million from joint accounts with Doris and funneled it to your mother to cover her gambling debts. Vance was speed reading through the document, and Curtis could see him calculating exposure, liability, criminal versus civil charges. This was more than a divorce complication. This was career-ending for everyone involved. This is, you can't. Brad looked like he might vomit. I can and I will. But here's Doris's actual offer. You sign our divorce agreement. Clean break. No alimony. No claims to her trust or assets. You and your family agree to a permanent no-contact order. And in exchange, these documents stay between us. You're blackmailing us, Brad said. I'm offering you a choice. You can accept a fair divorce and move on with your lives, or you can fight us and face criminal prosecution. Because make no mistake, If you force us into a public battle, all of this becomes part of the court record. And then it's not just my daughter's journalist friend who'll be interested. It'll be the IRS, the FBI, the state attorney general, and every media outlet in the country. Vance stood abruptly. Mr. English, I need to consult with my clients. This is quite complex. You have 48 hours, Curtis said. After that, Doris files for divorce on her terms, and we can't guarantee what happens to these documents. After they left, Curtis poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, Diana's favorite brand, the bottle he only opened on significant occasions. He raised the glass toward her photograph on the desk. We're almost there, my love. One more move. Doris found him an hour later, still in the study. Elena just called. She's ready to publish. She says if we're doing this, it needs to be now, while the story is hot. Tell her to hold for 2 more days. We need to see how the Dawsons respond. And if they don't take the deal? Curtis looked at his daughter, strong, intelligent, resilient. She'd gotten Diana's brains and his strategic thinking. Then we destroy them completely. But I don't think it'll come to that. Brad is weak, Barb is arrogant, and Jeffrey is a coward. They'll take the path of least resistance. How can you be sure? Because I know what they value most, their reputation and their lifestyle. Right now, they can salvage both. If they fight, they lose everything. Even Barb's pride has limits. But Curtis had underestimated Barb Dawson's capacity for self-destruction. The next morning, Barb called a press conference. Standing on the steps of the Dawson Foundation's headquarters, surrounded by her husband and son, she announced that her unstable and manipulative daughter-in-law had stolen foundation funds and was attempting to extort the family with fabricated evidence. Curtis watched the press conference on his phone, and for the first time in the entire operation, he felt genuine anger. Calling Doris unstable, accusing her of theft, these were calculated attacks designed to destroy her credibility before the divorce proceedings even began. That's it, he said quietly. The gloves come off. He made 3 calls. The first was to Kyle. File everything. Divorce, restraining order, and civil suit for defamation and emotional distress. I want the complaint to include every detail of the foundation fraud. The second was to Elena. Publish. Full story. Tomorrow morning. The third was to Robert Shun. Barb Dawson just went public with accusations against my daughter. I thought you should know that before you complete those property appraisals. Actually, Curtis, we finished them yesterday. You were right. The Dawson portfolio is significantly overleveraged. We're calling the loans. All of them. They have 30 days to pay in full or we foreclose. Curtis smiled grimly. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for the warning. If we'd waited, we'd have been looking at massive losses. The pieces were falling exactly into place. Barb's press conference had been her fatal mistake. By going public with accusations, she'd forced the divorce into the public eye. And once there, it was open season for media coverage. Elena's investigative piece would publish in the morning, the bank would call the loans within days, and the legal filings would bury the Dawsons in litigation they couldn't afford. Curtis called Doris into the study and showed her the press conference video. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Curtis said. I thought they'd be smarter than this. Don't be sorry. Doris's voice was steel. She just handed us everything we needed. Now everyone will see exactly who she is. The next few weeks will be brutal. The media will dig into your life, your marriage, everything. Are you prepared for that? Doris met his eyes, and Curtis saw Diana looking back at him. Fierce, determined, unbreakable. I've spent 3 years being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of the Dawson name. I let them make me small because I thought that's what marriage meant, compromise and sacrifice. But Mom didn't raise me to be small, Dad. She raised me to be strong. And you taught me that sometimes the right move is to flip the board and start a new game. Curtis felt pride swell in his chest. Then let's finish this. Elena's article hit the internet at 6 a.m. the next morning. The headline read, "The House That Fraud Built. Inside the Dawson Foundation's Decade of Deception." It was devastating. Elena had done her homework, documenting everything with bank records, interviews, photographs of substandard housing, and testimony from victims. She detailed how the foundation had collected over $40 million in donations while completing fewer than a dozen actual housing units. She showed how Barb Dawson had charged $500,000 in personal expenses to the foundation, including designer clothes, jewelry, and a luxury cruise passed off as a donor cultivation trip. But the most damaging section dealt with Brad's role. Elena had discovered that he'd been creating fake contractor invoices for work that was never done, then funneling those payments to shell companies controlled by his mother. It was textbook fraud, and the evidence was irrefutable. By noon, the story had been picked up by the national media. By evening, the state attorney general had announced an investigation. By the next morning, the IRS had frozen the foundation's accounts. Curtis watched it unfold from his study, tracking the news coverage like a general monitoring a battlefield. Each development was precisely what he'd anticipated, each reaction exactly what he predicted. The Dawsons were in freefall, and they had no idea how to stop it. Brad called Doris's phone 17 times that day. Curtis had changed her number. Barb tried to reach Curtis at his office and was told he was unavailable. Jeffrey Dawson, showing a spark of intelligence for the first time, called Kyle Horton directly. "My client would like to discuss settlement terms," Jeffrey said, his voice shaky. "Your client falsely accused my client of theft and embezzlement in a public press conference," Kyle responded. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. Please. This has gotten out of hand. We just wanted to stop. You wanted a public battle, Mr. Dawson. You have one. Now you get to live with the consequences." Kyle relayed the conversation to Curtis, who authorized one final offer. "They can sign our divorce agreement and settle the defamation suit for $10 million, or we proceed with full litigation." $10 million. Kyle raised an eyebrow. "They don't have that kind of liquid capital." "I know, which means they'll have to liquidate assets, sell properties, auction the art collection, downsize their lifestyle. It's the only way they avoid criminal prosecution. You're bankrupting them." "No, they bankrupted themselves. I'm just collecting the debt." The Dawsons had no choice but to accept. Their attorney, Antonio Vance, who'd represented them for over a decade, withdrew from the case, likely sensing the ethical quicksand he was standing in. Their new attorney was a junior partner at a mid-tier firm who looked terrified during the settlement conference. The terms were brutal but fair. Brad signed away all claims to Doris's assets and agreed to the divorce. The Dawson family paid $10 million in damages, most of it coming from the forced sale of their art collection and Jeffrey's prized vintage car collection. They signed a permanent no-contact agreement with Doris, enforceable with penalties up to $1 million per violation. But Curtis wasn't done. He'd arranged for the settlement conference to take place at Kyle's office, which meant he could be present. When the Dawsons arrived, Barb, Jeffrey, Brad, and their new attorney, Curtis was waiting in the conference room. Barb's perfectly made-up face couldn't hide the lines of stress. Jeffrey looked like he'd aged 10 years. Brad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. They sat across the table from Curtis, Kyle, and Doris like defendants awaiting sentencing. "Let me be very clear about what happens next," Curtis said, his voice conversational but cold. "You will sign these documents. You will liquidate assets to pay the settlement, and you will disappear from my daughter's life permanently." "This is extortion," Barb hissed. "You've destroyed our family over a simple misunderstanding." Curtis leaned forward. "You put your hands on my daughter. You called her nothing. You spent 3 years making her feel small and worthless because it made you feel powerful. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Mrs. Dawson. That was abuse. And abuse has consequences. We gave her everything. A home, a position in society. You gave her nothing she didn't already have. Doris comes from one of the most respected families in this state. Her mother was a pioneer in her field. I've built businesses from the ground up. The Dawsons didn't elevate Doris. You tried to diminish her so you could feel superior." Jeffrey spoke for the first time. "Mr. English, please. We understand we made mistakes. But destroying our foundation, our reputation, taking everything we have, isn't that punishment enough?" Curtis softened slightly. Jeffrey, at least, seemed to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. "Mr. Dawson, I didn't destroy your foundation. Your wife's greed and your son's incompetence did that. I simply documented it. If you'd run an honest charity, actually help people instead of using them for tax breaks and social climbing, none of this would have happened." He slid the settlement documents across the table. "Sign. Walk away. Rebuild your lives honestly, if you're capable of it. But stay away from Doris. Forever." Barb looked like she wanted to argue, but their attorney put a hand on her arm. "Mrs. Dawson, this is the best deal you're going to get. Sign it." One by one, they signed. When it was done, Curtis stood and extended his hand to their attorney. "Thank you for your professionalism." Then he took Doris's arm and walked out without another word to the Dawsons. 3 months later, Curtis and Doris stood in the sunroom, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. The divorce was finalized. The settlement had been paid. The Dawson Foundation had been dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to legitimate housing charities. Barb and Jeffrey had sold their Greenwich mansion and moved to a modest condo in Westchester. Brad had taken a job with a real estate firm in Florida, far from anyone who knew the Dawson name. Elena's article had won several journalism awards and led to criminal charges against 3 former foundation board members. The state attorney general was still investigating, but Doris and Curtis had been cleared of any involvement thanks to their cooperation and Curtis's meticulously organized evidence. "Are you okay?" Curtis asked his daughter. Doris nodded, sipping her wine. "I am. Really. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe." "Any regrets?" "Only that I didn't leave sooner. But I learned something important, Dad. About standing up for yourself, about knowing your worth, about not letting people make you small." She turned to him. "Thank you. For having my back. For teaching me to fight smart instead of just fighting hard." Curtis put his arm around her shoulders. "Your mother would be proud. You know that, right?" "I do. I think she'd also be a little scared of you." That was comprehensive revenge. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. There's a difference. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the day end. Curtis's phone buzzed, a message from Kyle. The Dawsons just filed for bankruptcy. Chapter 7. Complete liquidation. Curtis showed the message to Doris. She read it and nodded. "Is it wrong that I don't feel sorry for them?" "No. They made their choices. They're living with the consequences. That's not wrong. That's fair. What happens now? With us, I mean. Do I just move on? Start over?" "You do whatever makes you happy, Doris. Go back to work, travel, volunteer, fall in love again when you're ready. Live your life on your terms, not anyone else's." "What about you?" Curtis considered. "I think I might take a vacation. Haven't done that in years. Maybe go to the cabin in Vermont, do some fishing, play some chess against myself." "That sounds incredibly boring." "I've earned boring. The last 3 months have been exciting enough." He squeezed her shoulder. "But I'll always be here if you need me. Always." "I know, Dad. I know." 6 months after the divorce, Curtis received an unexpected visitor. Antonio Vance appeared at his door, looking considerably less polished than their previous meetings. "Mr. English. I hope I'm not intruding." Curtis invited him in, curious. "Mr. Vance. I'm surprised to see you. I thought you'd washed your hands of the Dawson matter." "I did. I had to, ethically. But I wanted to speak with you, off the record." Vance sat in the chair Curtis offered. "I've been practicing law for 25 years. I've represented some difficult clients, won cases I probably shouldn't have, and I've always told myself I was just doing my job. But what you did to the Dawsons, I've never seen anything like it. It was surgical, precise. You didn't just win, you completely dismantled them." Vance looked genuinely impressed. "I've been going over it in my mind, trying to figure out where they could have stopped it, where they could have won. And I can't find it. From the moment Barb Dawson slapped your daughter, you had them. Every move they made played into your hands." Curtis smiled slightly. "They made it easy. Arrogance combined with desperation is a fatal combination. I came here to ask how? How did you know they'd react exactly the way they did? How did you predict every move?" "Because I studied them, Mr. Vance. I spent 3 years watching how they operated, what they valued, what they feared. I knew Barb wouldn't back down because her entire identity was built on being superior to others. I knew Jeffrey would cave because he'd spent his entire life taking the path of least resistance. I knew Brad would panic because he'd never faced real consequences before." Curtis stood and walked to his chess set. "Do you play, Mr. Vance?" "Not well. Chess is about understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. It's about seeing not just what they will do, but what they must do, given who they are." He moved a piece. "The Dawsons had to react the way they did. Their pride, their fear, their greed. It all led them exactly where I needed them to go. That's almost frightening. What's frightening, Mr. Vance, is that they could have avoided all of it. All they had to do was treat Doris with basic human respect. They chose not to, and they paid the price." Vance stood. "Well, I wanted you to know that in all my years of practice, I've never seen a more complete victory. It's been educational. After Vance left, Curtis returned to the chessboard. He'd been playing a game against himself, working through a particularly complex endgame problem. But he found he'd lost interest. He looked at Diana's photograph on the mantle. I think I'm done with games for a while, my love. Time to just live. 1 year after the divorce, Doris hosted a small dinner party at Curtis's house. Kyle was there, along with Elena and several of Doris's friends who'd stood by her through the divorce. It was a celebration of sorts. Doris had just accepted a position as director of a legitimate affordable housing nonprofit, using her experience and her trust fund to actually help people. To new beginnings, Elena raised her glass. And to Curtis, the most terrifying man I've ever met. I'm not terrifying, Curtis protested mildly. Dad, you systematically destroyed an entire family's fortune, reputation, and freedom. That's a little terrifying. I prefer to think of it as justice, administered efficiently. Kyle laughed. Curtis, in all the years I've known you, you've never done anything by halves. When you commit to something, you commit completely. It's what made you a great soldier, a great businessman, and apparently, a great father. Curtis felt his throat tighten slightly. I just protected my daughter. Any father would do the same. Not like that, Doris said softly. Most fathers would have told me to work it out, to try harder, to make the marriage work. You listened to me. You believed me. And you made sure I'd never have to be afraid of them again. She raised her glass. To Dad, for teaching me that being strong doesn't mean suffering in silence. It means knowing when to walk away and when to fight back. They all drank, and Curtis felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of victory or revenge, but the peace of knowing he'd done the right thing, the only thing he could have done. Later, after the guests had left and Doris had gone home to her new apartment, Curtis sat in his study with a glass of scotch and Diana's photograph. We did it, love. She's free. She's strong. She's happy. He touched the frame gently. I think you'd approve of how it turned out. Though you'd probably tell me I was too harsh, too calculated. You always did temper my harder edges. He could almost hear her voice, warm and full of laughter. Curtis, you old bear. You were perfect. She needed you to be exactly who you are. Curtis smiled and raised his glass to the photograph. To you, Diana. And to Doris. And to the Dawsons, wherever they are, learning what it means to face real consequences. He drank, and for the first time since Diana's death 12 years ago, he felt like he could finally rest. The mission was complete. His daughter was safe. Justice had been served. The chessboard sat untouched on the side table. Curtis had no more games to play, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Epilogue. 2 years later, Curtis walked Doris down the aisle at her second wedding. The groom was a kind architect named Daniel York who made Doris laugh and treated her like an equal partner. Curtis had vetted him thoroughly, of course, but this time his investigation had turned up only good things. Honest, hardworking, from a stable family, genuinely in love with Doris for who she was. At the reception, as Doris danced with her new husband, Elena approached Curtis at the bar. You look satisfied, she observed. I am. This is what happiness looks like. This is what I was fighting for. Have you heard about the Dawsons lately? Curtis had, actually. Jeffrey had found work as a property manager, a considerable step down from real estate mogul. Barb had moved to Arizona and, according to Curtis's sources, was living quietly on Jeffrey's modest salary. Brad had remarried quickly, another trust fund woman, Curtis noted with dark amusement, and was working his way through her money just as he had Doris's. I've heard, but they're not my concern anymore. Do you ever think about it? What you did? Curtis considered the question. Every day, and every day, I'm satisfied with my choices. I protected my daughter. I exposed criminals. I made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. That's not something to regret. You know, I wrote a follow-up piece about the Dawson Foundation victims who received restitution from the settlement. You basically saved some of those families from homelessness. That was just a bonus. The goal was always Doris. Elena smiled. You're a good father, Curtis. A scary, incredibly strategic, somewhat terrifying father. But a good one. Curtis watched his daughter spin across the dance floor, radiant and free. That's all I ever wanted to be. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Curtis slipped outside for some air. Kyle found him on the terrace, looking at the stars. Thinking about Diana? Kyle asked. Always. Wishing she could see this. She'd love Daniel. She'd be so proud of Doris. She'd be proud of you too, you know, for what you did. Curtis shook his head. Diana would have found a gentler way. She always did. She would have talked to Barb, tried to find common ground, looked for a peaceful solution. Maybe. But Diana isn't here, and you did what you thought was right with the tools you had. Military strategy, business acumen, protective father instinct. You used everything at your disposal to protect your daughter. That's not something to feel guilty about. I don't feel guilty. I feel. Curtis searched for the word. Complete. Like I finished something important. Diana and I brought Doris into this world, raised her, taught her to be strong. And when she needed me most, I was there. That's all any parent can do. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the music and laughter drifting from inside. What now? Kyle asked. What does Curtis English do when there are no more battles to fight? Curtis smiled. I think I'll take that vacation I've been putting off. Maybe learn to paint, like Doris keeps suggesting. Spend time with friends. Live a quiet life. That sounds impossibly boring for you. Good. I've earned boring. I've earned quiet. I've earned peace. Curtis turned back toward the reception, where Doris was laughing with Daniel and her friends. And I've earned the right to just be a father at my daughter's wedding, not a general planning the next campaign. They walked back inside together, and Curtis danced with his daughter, held his new son-in-law in a firm handshake, and celebrated the new beginning that all his careful planning had made possible. As the night ended and the guests departed, Doris hugged Curtis tight. Thank you, Dad. For everything. For the wedding. For Daniel's background check. She grinned. For saving me from the Dawsons. For teaching me to be strong. For being you. Curtis kissed her forehead. You saved yourself, sweetheart. I just made sure you had the ammunition you needed. Everything else was you. We make a good team. The best. Just like your mother and I. Curtis smiled. Now go. Be happy. Build a life with Daniel. And if he ever gives you trouble, I know. You'll destroy him completely using perfectly legal but devastating tactics. Exactly. I'm glad we understand each other. Doris laughed and hugged him again, then left with her new husband, waving as they drove away. Curtis stood alone in the empty venue, surrounded by the remnants of celebration. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that terrible phone call 2 years ago to this moment of pure joy. He'd played the game perfectly, moved every piece exactly where it needed to be, and achieved total victory. But more importantly, he'd taught his daughter what Diana had taught him all those years ago, that love means protection, that family means loyalty, and that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to walk away and when to fight. Curtis picked up a leftover champagne glass and raised it to the empty room, to Diana's memory, to Doris's future, and to the Dawsons' defeat. Checkmate, he said quietly, and smiled. The game was over. His daughter was safe. Justice had been served. And Curtis English could finally, truly, rest. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.